Hello everyone, welcome to the Alpha Hustle. This is a weekend review of Bank Nifty on 21st Feb. We're going to start a new series of daily review of Bank Nifty auction process. This is the first of the series that we're going to start with. We'll take a quick review of the monthly charts followed by weekly and eventually ending with daily charts. Let's start with the monthly charts. Market continues to one time frame higher on monthly charts for 5 consecutive months, which shows that the longer term time frames are interested on the upside. Now let's take a look at the weekly charts. We had a massive 6,000 point rally towards the start of this month at the back of the budget with some volume expansion, followed by a tight, narrow range inside week within the selling tail of the prior week. Bulls had a very nice opening last week towards the high end of the range, and they were successful in extending the range to the upside before some strong hand sellers appeared between 37,700 to 37,770. So they were able to successfully push the prices back into the prior week's range. Though the one-time framing to the upside is still intact, the sellers seem to have showed dominance this week by creating a 1,000 point selling tail between 36,650 to 37,750. For buyers to be back in the game, they need to push the prices back into the selling tail, probably rotate, get some acceptance, and then probe higher. Any acceptance to the downside as a continuation to this week's close and week's low is potentially going to bring in more sellers, and then the context in the intermediate term time frame is going to change from buy the breaks to the sell the rips. Now let's take a look at the daily charts. So we have 3 days of one time framing to the downside after the buyers are able to hit fresh all-time highs at 37,770 with some volume expansion, suggesting that the selling is at the back of some strong hand sellers. We are approaching an important inflection zone of 35,450 to 35,500, which marks the low end of the prior week's balance. So any acceptance below is going to bring in more sellers and probably continuation to the downside. If the buyers are successful in able to defend this zone, we may probably have a pullback to the upside. Let's take a look at the market profile charts on how the market auctioned last week. So we had a nice gap up that led the rally, and the bulls were able to start an imbalance move out of the 5-day balance into the new all-time high territory zone. We had a nice follow through with the market opening towards the high end of the range, and the buyers were able to probe higher before meeting the responsive sellers at 37,700 to 37,770 zone. This HVN and the sellers in this zone pushed the markets back into the prior day's range. Market had a follow through to the downside on the subsequent days where all the rallies into the prior day's value area got sold into. We had an interesting price action on Friday. So markets started to accept within the prior week's range, prior week's balance on Thursday as well as Friday, suggesting a failed auction above the 5-day balance, and the destination for the failed auction is towards the low end of the balance. So market tried to probe lower and tag the low end of the balance. However, the responsive buyers in this zone stepped in to push the prices higher. So we had a double distribution day on Friday, which is an important reference with some data points that we need to carry forward for Monday's auction. So now let's take a look at the important references that we need to consider on how market is going to auction on Monday. So scenario one, let's assume that the market is going to open within the lower distribution. So the lower distribution of 25,570 to 36,000, which means that the sellers have not finished yet. So market may probably try to chop around, find some acceptance. If the buyers are not strong enough to push the prices into the upper distribution, which means that the sellers may probably extend the range below Friday's low. We have a nice weekly balance here, which is a strong demand zone. So any buyers would need to step in. Otherwise, a follow through to the downside or continuation of one time framing to the downside is going to bring in more sellers into the game. Scenario two, where The buyers were successful in pushing the prices back into the upper distribution of 36,120 to 36,600, which means that the buyers may probably are heading for the failed auction that's left in the C period, which also kind of a look above the balance where where the buyers tried to look above the balance and failed miserably to get an extension above it, which is a very important reference that probably the buyers may target to see whether the sellers within this zone are mechanical in nature, or these are some longer time frame sellers that kind of push the market down. So we're going to have a retest of this zone if the markets start to find acceptance within the upper distribution. So the important references to consider for Monday's auction is the weekly balance low of 35,460 to 35,500, which forms a strong demand zone. And any open within this lower distribution and fail to get acceptance or fail to head higher into the upper distribution would mean that the market is going to probe the weekly balance low, and any acceptance below is going to start another leg of liquidation. So any acceptance back into the upper distribution may probably retest the failed auction that's left at 36,600 to 36,680 zone. Any acceptance above would have an odds for short covering move and probably head higher and retest the overall failed auction that happened above the prior week's balance. That's all for this week. Thank you for joining and listening. We'll come up with a new video on Monday on how market auctioned and also an important references that we need to consider for Tuesday's auction. Thank you for watching. Happy trading.